There he is again, ladies and gentlemen, Chris Ward, the Dragon Tamer, the Dragon Master, the Dragon of all the dragons. How are you?
Hello. Hello, everybody. Yeah, welcome back for another little session, another Dragon Monthly. And this month I have not one, not three, but two short
No way.
to go over. Yeah, it's a change of pace, though. We're bringing it down a bit. Last time round, it was the fast and furious Yugoslav attack, hack, sack, checkmate, inverted dragon bishops, or whatever it was we did, and all that sort of stuff. But now I figured because we're supposed to encapsulate all things dragon, and I need to report on what's going on in the world, we have a new system which is picking up at the moment. It's almost verging on a trend or a fashion at the moment. So,
Are you
are you ready
kidding
to
me?
see
Now
Anna?
I am so curious, and I also want to know the name, but probably there is a name already for that.
The name of the variation. Do you know what we're going to have to? We're going to have to make up one for ourselves, right?
I love
Right.
that.
Because let's talk. So here we have it at the moment. Let's just pause at the moment. You go, come on. This is just a dragon. What are you talking about? Bishop E3, Bishop G, A6. And you think, oh no, this has already got a name. We call this the accelerated Dragodorf, was what
Yeah.
I named it once upon a time, because you will remember the Dragodorf was when we get dragony things on one side of the board and Najdorfy things on the other side of the board. But after the move F3, the idea of the accelerated Dragadorf was simply to leave this and prioritize all the B5, knight D7, bishop B7 things on the grounds that if white plays bishop H6, you'll save an extra tempo on not having put that bishop tier. But here we have a completely different idea. And I have touched on this before in one of our previous editions. Pawn to E5. Normally a move in the dragon doesn't really fit
No.
unless white has this pawn on f4 and it's going to be securing a knight on e5 after the trade of an e pawn for an f pawn. Now, why generally don't play in the dragon? Because it's got three horrendous features to it. First of all, you obstruct the dragon bishop when it's on
How
g7.
dare you?
Secondly, you put you well, yeah, you leave yourself with a backward D pawn.
Unfathomable.
And thirdly, all of the above. Now, I can't remember what the third one is. Yeah, so basically, that I know. The third one is you're conceding an outpost, of course.
That too.
That was, I knew it was going to come back to me. So E5. So, however, you're going to say, well, what's this all about? Well, at least we played A6, so there's no knight B5 attacking that with a bishop on G7. So the knight heads back to B3. And what happens in this system? Black plays bishop E6. So at the moment, this bishop has not yet committed itself here. Now, when I touched on this before, because it still comes under the classification, the ECO classification of a dragon, there was a game involving this guy, Dao Kyung Dai, who is a young Vietnamese IM. And he had a game previously, and he's also involved in this game we're looking at now, which saw white play g4, primarily because that keeps the idea here. So white battles for control over the d5 square. But no, it's not fast enough because black made that break anyway. The idea that if we get trades in the middle, that pawn now is going to look like a bit of a lemon there on f3. It's going to get
Yeah.
risky.
Did we had a similar game once,
We had
which yeah?
exactly
Yeah,
this. We
yeah.
didn't have the whole game. I just touched on it. And this is
Yes.
what I'm saying. This is the game that we saw. Knight c6 are very
Yes,
clever.
yes, yes.
Rather than going d4 straight away when white could take and end up pinning this knight to the rook on h8. Knight c6 and then here. So this is the last time we saw it played. And black ended up with a very pleasant endgame, which he went on to
Sweet.
third. So that was pretty good. But in this game here, white says, no, no, no. I'm going to play queen d2. I'm going to just facilitate the option of castling queenside.
Makes sense.
Now, this has huge similarities with the Najdorf variation, with the English attack variation in the Najdorf. And I have now, alongside my good old ex-flatmate from many years ago, as best man at his wedding, Grandmaster John Ems. We've done a deep dive on this line, a deep dive comparison between the dragon, this particular position here, and how it occurs via a normal Najdorf. So I'm
Okay.
talking a deep dive we've done. I mean, pretty deep, not necessarily that deep. A bit like if you go like swimming and you go to the deep end of the pool and think, I'm going to dive down the bottom and touch the bottom of the pool because that's the sort of guy I am. And you dive and it's all going well and you're nearly there and suddenly your ears start getting a bit, oh, that one, I don't fancy this too much. So you kind of abandon ship. Well, hopefully you weren't actually in a ship because then it wouldn't have been. Anyway, this is getting out of hand. So the fact of life is that we looked at it. We looked at it. Let's change that diving bit and move that away from that. Now, so the problem is you're going to say, well, what on earth is the use of this move G6? Well, we're going to get there in due course. So I think here that black could have just played like knight BD7, B5 type moves. But here, black played H5. So why did black play this? Well, black played this to prevent now G4 from ever happening, to prevent white from ever playing bishop H6, that might leave that a bit weaker, and just to expand on the king side. Last time I incorporated this in the dragon, because the bishop doesn't even make it to G7, it feels like a bit of a fraud when you look at lines like that. But let's see how this game goes. Knight BD7. Now it's over to white. Should he castle kingside? Should he castle queenside? It's pretty clear that black's going to be playing the moves such as rook C8, B5, blah, 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 blah. So here white played knight d5, very plausible move, and we get a nice little piece of an imbalance here with e takes d5. So this game is very different probably from any other game we'll ever really look at on this site, but it still comes under the classification of a dragon. And here I think most players would just kind of play, bishop g7. That seems fine. We're going to get a position. And we could argue that actually the pawn is better now on e5 than it would be on e7 because white gets no real chance of pressure against e7 when he gets a rook ultimately to e1. And this pawn, of course, controls handy squares. So I quite like that pawn there. But black played h4 now, grasping further space on the king side. So white thought, well, if you're going to do that, I better castle queen side.
That's a nice signaling, yeah.
Yep. And black now plays bishop to g7. Also possible, actually, was the move knight b6. I'm going to stick with here, but that would have been a very interesting move, targeting that pawn. White doesn't really want to be going c4 because rook c8 is going to pin it. And also, as I say, then after rook c8, attacking that pawn on c4, the c4 pawn wouldn't effectively be protecting d5 anymore. So it would be the c4 pawn and the d5 pawn that would be under threat. And actually, one sneaky little idea is if white now played queen a5, defending the pawn and attacking the knight, actually might be able to take that. But at the very least, we'd be able to play bishop h6. Look at that. And that was one of the reasons for putting our moving our h pawn in the first. But anyway, we're going to stick with bishop g7 because we finally got our bishop on its traditional dragon post. King b1. And now black really goes. So I'm not entirely convinced that this was the best move to play, but that's why I'm going to whiz through this game just to show it to you. So some of our viewers might think, oh, do you know what? I might give this idea a try. It looks quite interesting.
I'm already tempted.
And I have to tell you that it's got quite good results so far. Leading the way, of course, is this young Vietnamese, I am. And he's very young, actually, by the way. Might not even be old enough to go to the deep end of the pool. Okay, let's move away from that deep dive.
I'm already convinced that this is the almost deep end variation or deep dive variation.
Deep dive variation. Okay, so h3 was played now here, and white played g4, and then black played b5. So look at this. He's like covering all bases by a bit of action in the center, bit on the left flank, bit on the right flank.
Nice. There's only one pawn left on the 7th row. I like it.
Yeah, that's very good. Excellent. So white played g5. Let's keep going with this game here. And knight comes to h5. So very interesting game at the moment. And now white played the move knight a5 eyeing up this potentially. Yeah,
Hmm.
certainly looks like an attractive pose sort of thing. You might see quite a few players play, but now the idea is the knight comes to f4. And now, because we're cutting across this defense of the g5 pawn, so if knight c6, we can
Oh.
just take that pawn. And of course, white can't. White doesn't really want to give up that dark square bishop because it would allow this bishop to enter the game. But of course, the queen can't take on f4 whilst there's a knight hanging on a5. Anyway, white played rook g1 and black played knight b6. Okay, so we're eyeing up that pawn there on d5. The white knight came into c6 and black played queen c7. So at the moment you're kind of thinking, well, that wasn't necessarily ideal here for us to have our queen here. But of course, we're looking to potentially undermine that at some point.
Exactly, yeah.
Now look at this. Bishop did take the knight. I feel it had to do it now.
Yeah.
Take. And then he called. I can't really, don't really want to take that pawn with my queen because there's the knight takes d5 things coming my way maybe at some stage. I don't think that would happen now, but after queen takes f4, I think castles. Like I say, we have tremendous pressure brewing here. White played rook to g4, coming after that pawn with the rook, and now the bishop did park itself on e5. So
Whoa.
that is a wonderful bishop. So the idea is even if white took this now, took back, this is a pawn which is potentially passed, but even if well, it is a passed pawn, queen c5, but even here, we would have it under lock and key now with our rooks. And this bishop is no match. This knight is much better than this bishop at the moment. So that would be quite a nice position for black. So after bishop e5, white thought I'd better kind of blunt that dragon-y, bishop-y, diagonally type thing. And black thought, right, all safe to castle now. I'm going to castle. Although I observed that actually in these sort of positions, king f8 is also not a bad idea. And he could have happily left a rook on the h file.
Yeah, queen e1 might happen at one point, and then queen h4, and
Yeah,
that's,
well,
yeah.
you're incredible because that did actually occur in the game at some stage. Let's see what happened here. So actually what happened after castles is white played rook e1, rook h4, sorry, eyeing up the h3 pawn and potential for a checkmate down the h file. But of course, there's no checkmate on h8 until A, the queen gets over here somehow, and B, that bishop is gone. So let's see, rook h4, rook f e8, was played in this game, and white took this pawn. So white's actually gone pawn up at the moment. But rook a c8, we are lining up potential things with knight takes d5. White played bishop f1, and knight takes d5 did occur here. So I think probably what could have happened, we could have had a trade takes. We could have got an endgame with opposite color bishops. Maybe that's a bit weak. Maybe there's chances here. You probably still think that should end up a little bit drawish, you'd have thought. But white took this here. I don't think that's a good idea. But he did that because he's thinking, he's dreaming of a checkmate maybe down that H file. And the queen came to f2. So not e1. Obviously, the rook's covering that square now. But f2 purely with the idea of squizzing to h4 and down to h8. Well, we took the pawn now, or black took the pawn now. So obviously, queen h4 here can simply be met by rook h5. But rook h6 came with the similar idea. So now your idea is definitely on the cards here. But look what happened now. Nifty little maneuver. Queen e7, queen h4, and queen e5. So the queen on e5, just like a dragon bishop, controls this key square down here.
Oh,
On
it's the
h8.
dragon queen now.
It is the dragon queen.
How
Exactly.
cute.
Now, white tried to dislodge the dragon queen. Now the black knight jumped in, and the tables are soon to be turned because black is now looking to go on the
Yeah.
attack.
I'm
So,
looking
for
at,
example,
I just looked at queen, knight takes, knight came from d5, did it?
yeah,
No,
it
yeah.
did.
I looked at knight takes c3, but white doesn't even have to take back, unfortunately.
No,
Otherwise,
but it's always good to look at ideas
yeah.
like that. But actually, here, of course, let's not forget that we are threatening here, which basically that's going to be checkmate, isn't it?
Oh,
Because you know
yes.
the story, King C1, kiss of death straight away, and if King A1, I don't even, I'm not even going to insult our viewers by going over it, but we know knight A3, queen B1, knight C2,
Smothered. Oh,
smothered checkmate. There we go.
so
Look at that.
beautiful.
Absolutely fantastic. So we're threading queen F5. So White said, I better stop that with bishop D3. And then rook G2. And now all of a sudden our pieces, man, we are swinging into action. Rook takes B2 on the cards. King takes, queen takes C3 check. You name it. Looks pretty bad news. So as White says, I'm getting out of there. King A1. Now, your idea, oh man, is that going to work? What do you think?
It cannot. We're going to be checkmated.
Do you know what? That is what. Oh man, this is exactly what I want to see. Look out for checks. You can't allow Queen D8, King G7, Queen H8, checkmate. You have to keep an eye on what your opponent's threatening. It's not always one-way traffic. Well, except on those like one-way streets where everything's going in the same
There it
direction.
would be one-way traffic. That's true.
Right. So Queen D8, we can't allow that. But Black said, no, don't worry about that. I'm going to break through in a different way. B4, that pawn cannot be taken because the queen takes B2.
And
checkmate.
it's full of tactics. So another thing which crosses my mind is to go rook B2 immediately. But then again, the question is, can we not just give a check on H8? And
Yes, he could do that and try and bail out for some
Yeah.
sort of endgame. Although those endgames are probably still looking quite good for Black, to be fair, actually. So your idea, I would not rule out your idea, but I think this is a pretty crushing move, actually.
yeah, I mean, B4 looks much better, honestly. Yeah.
I mean, as it happened, White now attacked this rook here, but now D8 is no longer covered. Rook takes C3 did occur. Oh man, and it's totes curtains. So, for example, amongst other things, Rook C1 and Queen B2, mate, are threatened. White tried to do a little bailout, but okay, then it just gave him the worst endgame the world's ever seen. And he promptly resigned here. His bishop's under attack. He's got to keep an eye out for the little fork on C2. This little piggy could be going to market at some stage. And yeah, it's just bad news. Well, he resigned. Game over. That's it. No more of that game there. So all I can say, so that is the first game I wanted to show you with a completely new system, basically. Yeah.
Very nice.
So
almost deep dive system.
The almost deep dive line, yeah. Now, we're moving on now to something, though, which is a bit more under the traditional dragon kind of like jurisdiction.
Okay.
But also, this one's not about checkmates. This is about a really neat, I know you like them, a neat endgame which came up. And I don't know why. Some things amused me. You're going to understand when we get there. But it's got a very interesting part of the opening, which I'm super impressed with.
I'm also super impressed that Black is a 150 points lower rated player.
He is, and he gets a neat scalp in this particular game. A very neat scalp, as you're going to see. And he plays a very nice move. So White played Bishop E2. We normally say around about an hour. Boo, hiss, if he's going to castle king side.
Yeah, oh, God, I hate it so much.
You hate it. But this is why you're going to love this game, because it's like it covers all bases, just so it's very simple chess.
Looking forward.
White here. In the old days, we used to see a classical with this bishop here, the knight here, whatever, those sort of lines.
Yeah.
But a hyper fashionable line involves this move, rook E1, basically. And what White basically says is, do you know what? I'm going to chill out a little bit here. Then I'm going to put my bishop on G5 and I'm just going to pile the pressure on around about F6. I've drawn a lot of kind of red lines on the board, but I think you get the general picture here. Rook E1, let's just play a few of those moves. That seems a bit easier. Knight B3. So I've faced this system quite a lot of times in my life. Yeah. And I often just go A6 and say, you know what? If you're going to faff around like that, I'm just going to get on with a bit of queenside. How's about that? So White played Bishop F1 just with the same sort of plan here. And I think every time I have this position here, I've played B5. But Black played a really interesting move in this position.
What might that be?
You know what? I'm going to be tempted to adopt this move myself. Should I get this again next time around? I think it's just a very clever, nice move. And that is to play the move Bishop to G4. Yep. Now, the idea is that bishop is now attacking the queen. Yeah. So if white doesn't do anything about that, happy days.
True.
But we assume he's going to do something about it. If he moves the queen, he doesn't want to move it to D2. That looks kind of ugly,
Yeah.
obviously. If he goes to D4, we'll snap it up with our knight. So we'll all that. D3 is vulnerable to a knight E5 and sort of thing. So almost always the instinct, he's not gone bishop E2 just so that he could do bishop F1 so he can come back to E2. Although as black, I wouldn't expect that we go bishop c8 for a repetition. No, we could happily trade off, and then the key point is this c4 square becomes an awful lot weaker. Generally speaking, in these positions, a trade of light square bishops will always favour black because that c4 square becomes that much weaker, and we look forward to occupying it with a black knight.
Okay.
So white played f3. That's probably what you're expecting, yeah? Pawn to f3 and the bishop drops back. And you can say, well, what was the point in going there? And my argument is now, under such circumstances, this for me is a detrimental inclusion. White would rather not have that. They would rather that pawn be back on f2 than f3. It does support the e4 pawn, but of course it exposes the king along this diagonal. And if the dark square bishops get traded off, there's going to be a few dark square holes. So this is what I like about this game. So white played bishop g5, fair enough. I think there's a number of moves that black could do here, actually. Black here settled for the move. I think rook c8 is a very reasonable move, for example. Black played queen c7. Let's see how this goes. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt here for a lot of moves. Queen d2. So I think the idea is, for example, you could say, well, hang on, what would happen if white just played knight d5? I'm thinking takes, knight e5. We'd have a nice imbalance of the bishop for knight situation, but again, we'd be looking to occupy the square. Let's see, for example, if f4, knight c4, even though white can now win that pawn on e7, of course, we could take this now, and we're unleashing the bishop along here. We're attacking the rook, and of course, if we take this pawn, rook b1, knight c3 at the very least will win the exchange. So that would be very nice for black. Instead, white played queen d2 because he needs a new plan. Rook a c8. Yeah. I mean, I think knight e5 as well would be a very reasonable move here, but rook c8, yeah, let's bring the rook. And the idea, of course, is we're going to go for the queen side pressure. Bishop h6, offering to swap off the dragon bishop, but I just think it's not really a very good plan. Maybe white was completely stuck for a plan, but I just don't think with these dark square holes it really comes to anything.
Oh, it takes. Okay.
It's not like there's any serious chance of a checkmate on h7. There's not even a knight that could come to g5, let alone a rook that could be opened up on the h file.
Okay.
Yep. So now knight e5, so we're just continuing very simply. Yep. So what is our plan? Well, again, for example, if white played pawn to f4, there's the chance of knight g4 as well, in conjunction with a check on b6. We could see another snazzy little knight f2 check coming into play. And other than that, we got the simple idea of b5 to b4. So the white queen drops back to d2, and we see b5 anyway. This is such simple chess.
Very simple.
So this is what happens. If white castles on the king's side, just get underway on the queen's side. White did play f4 now. I feel he needs to budge that knight if he's going to make any progress. And I think there's a few reasonable options. So, for example, and returning to the question we had in the previous game, this would also be quite reasonable. And that, under these sort of circumstances, is when e5 does become a very playable idea, just to make sure you've got pawns fixed on the opposite colour square from your remaining bishop. But I think what happened in the game is just as good. Queen a7 check. And yeah, so what's white going to do about that? Is he going to really go king h1? Or is he going to block with the queen? Well, he ponders it for a while and decides he probably better get the queen swapped off with queen d4. And I can't necessarily blame him under these circumstances. Queen d4 is what happened. And now we get still we're coming closer and closer to an endgame where there's queenside pressure and long-term invasion on the square c2 once we've negotiated that knight. Now, we know in different situations we might be able to go rook takes c3 to sacrifice the exchange if it means winning that pawn on e4. We're not going to win the pawn on e4 here, so we're just doing the very basics. Bishop takes c4, rook takes c4. So, if, for example, white traded here, let's have a little look, simple chess again, and played a3, stopping black playing b4. Then after here, for example, we're attacking the f4 pawn, and after here, I just think this would just be quite a nice position for black already. Okay, we're
That
going to
looks
end up
good.
with our knight coming to on e5, just nice. So, after rook takes c4, white went rook a d1. And it's just simple chess. Bishop g4 attacks that rook, rook d2, and e5 again. This is it.
There it is
Striking
again.
out, budging that knight on d4. Well, white has to really take it. F takes e5, d takes e5, and knight f3. After which, we have the same amount of rooks, pawns, and knights, but we have a slightly better structure based on the 2 pawn islands compared to white's 3 pawn islands.
Especially f4 looks yummy for the knight.
Yummy, yummy, yummy square, isolated pawn, and of course, still the C
Yeah.
file pressure. Rook fc8. I mean, this is just so simple. Well, white gets one shot at activity now. And does he go for it? Yes, he does actually. But I mean, what else could he do? I mean, there's a grovelly move like rook e2, and then we can just start improving slowly but surely, maybe hop that knight around, still go with the queenside pressure. Rook to d6 is one
Okay.
chance. Hitting the knight and the pawn on a6.
Pawn.
Well, we did keep our knight here for the time being. King g7, rook takes a6. But of course, it now means we're going to get a rook on the 7th rank. Brilliant. Where can this knight go to? It's pretty grim. I think the knight had to go to d5. I know you were looking forward to getting a knight on that outpost f4, but for now we simply trade.
What a
And
sad story, but
rook
looks good for
takes c.
black. But then rook d1, and is it a bit concerning or is nothing
I think
happening?
not really. I think not really, because basically we're going
Are
to take that d pawn will be under lock and key from the
yeah,
rook on c8 and the king. They're all fairly under control, and
that's
then the
true.
other rook can go hoovering, I think. So I wouldn't worry too much about that at all. Um, if yeah, I mean basically simply we're threatening to take some things. So here white played rook to c6. Can we blame? Well, if for example he'd taken this pawn here, we can see lawnmower or yeah, ladder checkmate straight on the
Ladder
rook.
checkmate, yeah, not
Yep. And then seventh rank, seventh heaven with the rooks. Yeah, yeah, it's just lovely for black. I know you're getting panicked. You're getting a bit jittery about that pawn. I can see it.
not anymore.
Over just about everything in town and still come behind it if we
Yeah.
needed. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. White therefore played rook c6 to offer a trade of rooks. And we said, okay, we'll have that one, have that one. And now this is a very interesting situation. So are all rook and pawns drawn? Well, no, not if you can get big pawn majorities and connected pass pawns. That's what we really want. So the question is, we don't really want white getting like connected pass pawns all the way down there. Fortunately, they're a long way away from there. I think there's a number of moves that are quite good for black, but the way he played this game was quite neat too. He played pawn to b3, just literally takes to ensure that white wouldn't get any connected pass pawns of his own. And meanwhile, he's going to have a huge majority on the king's side. Rook to d1, rook takes c6, and rook d2, bit grovelly. King f5, rook d7. Whoa, he wins this pawn here. But look, it wasn't the knight that made it there. It was the king that made it there. Let's keep going with this. Check, king takes pawn, and rook c4. Now this, this is what we've been working up towards. Okay, this is absolutely brilliant. Right, now here's the big question. Right, as black, Should you play rook takes rook in this position? Or
Beautiful. For you at home, please calculate it on your own because it's important to get this into your head. Now, I am thinking if we take and the pawn takes back, the other pawn on b4, on b2 will go to b4, and then they will just move a little forward, and the black king has to be stopping them, so it has to go back to c6 or something like that, or maybe, yeah, a bit.
right, I'm going to stop you here for a second, and we're about to return to this, okay? Because this is quite important. First things first. If you were short on time remotely in this game,
Yeah.
you should never swap off the rooks. Okay, you only enter a king and pawn endgame if you are absolutely sure it is winning or it gets the
And I'm not.
desired result.
And I'm not.
Because it doesn't matter how good, how high rated you are. You know, I lose. Honestly, I find this so amusing when I see two little kids just playing a friendly game at chess club, and one of them is getting horribly smashed. And then they say, "Oh, Grandmaster, can you please come and help me? I'm stuck." And I get there, and they've got like a king left, and they're like expecting miracles from me. And I think, they say, "But you're a Grandmaster.
You should
must
win
be
with
able
the
to."
king.
And I'm thinking, oh, thanks very much. Yeah. So first things first, let's just get the dull stuff out of the way, right?
Okay.
This is how the game continued. Rook d6, keeping the rooks on the board. Absolutely correct idea. And before you know it, we ended up with, he even gave away that pawn and he's a pawn down, but he had connected passed pawns and they are the bee's knees. That is what you want in the game of chess. Connected passed pawns. And that wins you the game. Well, you know, it won him the game here because he got an extra queen and yada, yada, yada.
Beautiful.
Absolutely brilliant. But I wanted, as you know, to ask about rook takes rook because I found this funny, and I know you like rook and pawn endgames, and I know you like endgames now, and I know a lot of our viewers are going to say, "Really, can't I just stop the video?" And of course, you could stop the video here now because you want to go off and do something more different with your lives. Absolutely fine. You could pause the video here and challenge yourself to work out this king and pawn endgame, or you could even fast forward the video because it's going to take a while for Arda to figure it out. So basically, you've got all options are possible here. Now, so what we're going to do is I'm going to play the first move for you here. And this is the reason I thought this was such a funny endgame, right? So I'm thinking the first thing going through your mind is what happens if the king comes back to like look after this, and then we end up with a little bit of an impasse with black king holding up the white's two pawns, and then the white king maybe holding up the black two pawns. That doesn't seem. But I'm going to even tell you the first idea, and then I want you to do some calculations. Instead of that, this move.
Oh my God, we have what is it called? Capablanca or
no? Well, no. Oh, you were to right. No, I'm not going there. I know what you're thinking. Go some odd direction so you're covering both bases. So you can go. We still can't actually catch up with this.
Yeah, it doesn't look to me like that. Yeah.
And it's got a simple plan. This little guy is looking to motor down the board. So let's see some counting in operation, because that is very important.
Wow. Not giving a check on f2. Why could I miss that?
Well, no, you haven't missed it. No, absolutely not. Open the eyes, get going, because it's a lot trickier than you're about to suggest.
Okay.
So let's talk me through it. Okay, talk me through it.
So my idea is now, wait, whose move is it? White.
White. It's white's move. That's very important.
What happens if the pawn moves to c5?
Yeah.
Our pawn moves to f5, c6, f4, c7, f3. And if the queen would go to c8, we would give a check on f2 and then a check on f1 with the queen. And I'm pretty sure black will win this. Maybe.
I'm not letting you off the hook that easily. I'm pretty sure. This is that you've reached the key position that I want to discuss.
No, it's not.
White gets a queen, black goes f2 check, king g2, f1 check.
Yes.
King has to go to g3.
Yes.
This is what I find really. Do you know what? Because I'm feeling generous, we're going to go to that position. Yeah,
Okay.
we're going to jump to
All
that.
right. Okay. Okay.
Everyone that was everyone anyway that was fast forwarding has probably been got a bit of a shock there. King G3, and now what?
Oh, how funny. So here's the, okay, I'll tell you.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's super easy.
no, it's not super easy. Go
It's
for it.
super easy. Queen F2 check. King can own, oh wait, no, it's not super easy. Stop, stop, stop.
Okay,
Queen F4 check.
right.
The king has two spots to go to. If the king goes to H3, this is the main thing, I guess. Well,
Well, if he
if the
goes to
king goes
G2,
to
hang on,
G2, we're
hang
checkmating.
on. So Queen F4, if he goes to King G2, it's mate by going Queen F3,
Yeah,
King G1.
yeah, yeah.
So we go one way, then we come back, then we go the other.
And now the fun begins. Queen F5 check.
Yep,
Queen swaps.
yep,
We take on F5.
yep.
And now the other pawn, B4, F4, and so on. We give a check again on F1, and black will win.
Absolutely correct.
My
so
God.
Queen F, well done. Look at your endgame skills. So if he goes King G2, it's the nice little back up the Queen F3, Queen F2, Queen F1 mate. So he has to go here. So now we get a different queen
That's
ending. And this
so
time
cool.
around, we queen, we check and then win the game nice and easy. How neat was that? I just thought that was quite cute.
That's
looking at
super
that.
cool. That's super cool. That is very, very beautiful. Is there any other path? Because, I mean, what would happen if no C5 will walk?
No, I don't think that's absolutely forced. After King E2, it doesn't really make any difference because here we're just going to move our F pawn, and of course, any other timeout will be with the white king.
You're
And
right. The king cannot move away. It's the F5 will move no matter what happens.
that's correct. So he can't, and he can't look to
Wow.
move the H pawn. So it's got to be seen. It's entirely forced.
So this is, yeah, this has left me a little bit skeptical, but now that I see it, it's the only way, and that makes it much easier to calculate, of course. Wow. But that is
So
beautiful.
yeah, and that reminds me, we had a little question actually, Anna, about somebody asked.
Oh yeah. On YouTube.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
asked something along the lines of, can we ask GM Ward, who I guess is me, when he first started using computer chess programs to aid in his chess training?
Now I'm curious.
Now, okay, so many years ago, I've already mentioned it with my deep diving co-host. I shared a flat with Grandmaster John Ems, and we used to play in chess tournaments, traveling around, and we used to study a lot together. And we used to literally put time aside. We'd sit down there with a chessboard. We'd analyze openings in general, but sometimes middle games. And in the early days, we just did it without the use of any sort of computers whatsoever. And then, of course, ChessBase appeared just like that. Now, the very early versions of ChessBase, I remember them. In fact, we had the computers, we had laptops, but they weren't very good. And you just have to stick a little dongle in the
Oh
back
my
of it.
God, that early, that is like, yeah, if you had the dongle, then you are one of
That was
the
it. That was the
earliest
early
evers.
days.
Yeah.
And also I remember I used to have floppy drives
Yeah.
where, because they did ChessBase magazine or something.
Yes.
So you didn't have databases like you do now. It was like you'd have like 1,000 or so games on each floppy disk. So if you wanted to try and find games of an opponent, you had to keep putting in different floppy disks, and you might get one or two if you're really lucky.
It didn't fit more on one, but it was still probably the easier option than to drive to hundreds of different books or games or
Absolutely
something like that,
correct. Absolutely correct. So I did use that, but we have to say, even though the early versions of Fritz were there, we didn't really trust it to come up with good ideas. We had it as it was more a kind of, we might have it running in the background as an error checker, because if there was suddenly a huge swing, it meant we'd overlook something big.
Oh, that's
but
cool.
the kind of positional features, we weren't really interested in its assessment.
And rightfully so. I mean, back then it was still not perfect.
Absolutely. So the fact is that I used those at the beginning. They were still very good, for data manipulation, putting in your own games, having your own databases and things like that. But then as it's progressed, I would keep up to date with the various chess-based software. I would always advise that was a fantastic thing to use, chess-based. And I don't know. I'm not always up to date with the latest version, as Arna would tell you only too well. Stroke nagging me every now and again. But they have amazing features and they just always find the way to come up with new ones. Table bases, of course, appeared at some point, whereby suddenly you click down to like 4 pieces or 5 pieces remaining, and it would say draw in 46 or whatever. And you think, wow, that's amazing, because it had calculated all different versions. They came along quite a lot later, actually, table bases. So that's really it. So literally, probably from as soon as became a professional chess player after leaving university, was when the early versions around about then of chess base were around, and I was using them, and they progressed. But it's not actually, of course, it's computers progressing, which was a rather helpful thing as
Yeah.
well. And that was it. So that's when it started. And of course, I would still highly recommend them. Chess base, fantastic. Apparently, the new version of Fritz is coming out. Is that
That's
right?
a secret, Chris.
And not to our listeners now. No, no, no. No, quick, edit it out. Edit it out.
No, I'll leave it absolutely unedited, as I do with probably every episode we had so
Brilliant.
far.
So I hope that's
And
yeah,
thanks,
fantastic.
thank you so much, Chris. If you have questions, ask them on YouTube. We might answer them. Not always, but
I'll
maybe.
do my best.
Yeah.
I'll do.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. See you next time.
Bye bye.